You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, biohacking, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere and anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your host, Dr. Justin Marchegiani, as he answers your burning health questions as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Welcome to Beyond Wellness Radio. Feel free and head over to beyondwellnessradio.com where you can access our full podcast transcriptions. While you're there, you can also sign up for our thyroid and female hormone video series. This series goes into the root cause of why your hormones are out of balance. While you're there, you can also schedule a functional medicine consult with Dr. Justin, myself, where we'll dig deeper into the root cause of your health challenges. Feel free and think of sharing this podcast with at least one person. This podcast grows by people sharing it. Sharing is caring. If you can think of one person that can benefit from this information, please feel free and share it. If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure you subscribe on iTunes. You can also click below the video or podcast where you'll see the iTunes review button and leave us a review. You can also sign up for the newsletter at beyondwellnessradio.com where you'll get updates before anyone else. Thank you so much and enjoy the show. Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani with Beyond Wellness Radio. We have an awesome guest today. I've had a couple of my patients who are dealing with histamine issues. So backed by popular demand, we have one of the biggest histamine experts out there. Yasmina Ykelenstam is here on the show. Yasmina is a former CNN producer. She had her own health challenges where she was able to come up with dietary changes. Part of that was cutting out gluten and also reducing histamine from her diet. And she has a great site over at thelowhistamineChef.com, thelowhistamineChef.com. Great references, great blog articles there. So everyone head over there, check it out. But Yasmina, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a big fan of your work.
Thanks a lot. And me as well. I mean, you got a great site up here. I mean, one of the things I see in my functional medicine practice is I see a lot of patients with histamine issues, and we'll talk about what that is in a bit. But one of the triggers that I see is parasites. That people come in, they have a lot of gut bugs, which typically equals a lot of inflammation. The more inflamed your gut is, it's like a ticking time bomb for histamine. And I know one of your most recent blogs kind of touched upon that, so that really hit close to home for me. So I wanted to just kind of get everyone to get a sense of where you are on this journey, because you were a producer, you were in media. How did you get over into this natural health side of the world?
Well, my body broke down basically, and I thought I was dying. And I really didn't have a choice. I mean, I've never liked cooking. I was always kind of interested in health, but to me, health meant buying an organic pizza from Whole Foods, right. and having an organic cola with it, that kind of thing. And so I was really kind of fooling myself thinking that I was doing the right thing for my body. But so it was really all born out of necessity. I mean, for me, stress is my biggest trigger, in addition to other issues, but really stress. So working as a journalist in war zones was really not the smartest thing I could do for myself. And a huge part of the recovery process was learning how to manage the stress, but the kind of emotional aspect of it, but also the physical aspect. And it was born of necessity, as it is for so many of us. The kind of wounded healer archetype that is so apt for so many of us.
Absolutely.
And so I started my journey in a very kind of methodical, journalistic way, just trying to apply everything I had used as a journalist. I interned at 60 Minutes. I worked for the BBC. I started out as a researcher, and then worked my way up to a producer. So I was very familiar with kind of intensive research sessions that go on for 12 hours at a time when pursuing a story. And I wanted to do something different with my blog, which was, maybe not different, but there aren't many bloggers who kind of approach things from the scientific standpoint, which is, we're not doctors, but we're, looking at the medical studies that come out and sharing that information with readers so that they can make better informed decisions with their physicians rather than trying to go it alone. For example, with this parasite thing that I just recently blogged about, showing that parasites are a major trigger of histamine-related inflammation in the body. So you have all of these inflammation symptoms. Doctors can't really pin them down. You may be misdiagnosed with other issues, and maybe then you find out it's a parasite issue, but your doctor maybe doesn't want to test you for parasites, which is where someone like you would come along in functional medicine, who's more open to kind of thinking out of the box and accepting that sometimes we need to look beyond the tip of our nose for an explanation. And so the information that I share in my post on parasites, for example, touches upon different ways of treating them, what tests to ask your doctor for. But also I say, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not sharing exact dosages of herbs that you might go out and try and treat yourself with, because that's not the aim of this blog. It's just to share the information with you so you can share it with other people who are better informed to make those medical decisions with you.
That's great. So you started having these health challenges back, I think, in the mid-2000s. You mentioned, I think you were over in Iraq. And how did you come across the histamine approach? Because histamine's, it's getting more popular, but 10 years ago, it had to have been more nuanced. I mean, paleo was just kind of coming out. You had the gluten-free thing kind of happening too. So how did you grab the low histamine piece and make that your niche?
Oh, wow. That was sheer luck. That was unbelievable. I literally I lost my mind after tracking my symptoms and which foods were bothering me for about 6 months. And then I finally just put everything into Google, and it just came up with a forum where I met this wonderful woman who's also a blogger, and she was in contact with a practitioner in London who tested for histamine issues. So I flew from Bangkok to London, I think it was a few days later, to get tested, and that happened. I received a diagnosis of histamine intolerance, which was too much histamine in my blood, too little of the histamine degrading enzyme in the body, diamine oxidase, DAO. And some people may not know this, but histamine is necessary for healing. It's used as a neurotransmitter. It's necessary for digestion. Histamine is a good thing. Too much histamine is a bad thing. Without histamine, we wouldn't be able to fend off viruses or, fight bacterial infections or parasites, for example. But at the time that I was diagnosed, there was absolutely no information out there. And I mean, it was actually quite distressing. There was literally nothing. I was researching and researching and researching. There was one paper at the time, and that was pretty much it. But slowly, I started looking deeper into the medical journals, and I found out histamine was related to mast cells, which are part of the white blood cell system, and that the origin of histamine release is actually from mast cells as well as foods. So, and that's where I came up with this idea that turned out to be transformative. I mean, it completely changed my life, that avoiding histamine-containing foods wasn't going to heal me. It was an overall anti-inflammatory diet with a focus on excellent nutrition that was going to.
Great points. Yeah, one of the things I always tell my patients is kind of this metaphor of the histamine bucket. And basically in that bucket, environmental toxins kind of fill up in that bucket. Dietary stress fills up in that bucket. Various drugs or hormonal imbalances or nutritional deficiencies or infections, they fill up that bucket. And so essentially, some of the histamine foods or the higher histamine foods can just be enough to overflow that bucket, and a lot of those symptoms start to occur, whether it's the urticaria hives or whether it's just fatigue or skin issues or brain fog, etc. And it's interesting because it's never just one thing, like the parasite article or some of the higher histamine foods. It tends to be a couple of different things. And what are those couple of things that were specific to you and most of the people that write to you?
Well, I look at it. The histamine bucket is an excellent analogy metaphor. I always get those mixed up, but it's for me, it's the inflammation bucket in the end,
Mm-hmm.
which is that things like
Yes, I like that.
gluten become a problem because, the latest research shows that certain people are not celiac, but still
Right.
have an immediate, acute inflammatory reaction, a systemic reaction. So for me, things like gluten, even pets, hay fever. I mean, just being exposed to pollen. But for me, stress was really, really the
Yeah.
biggest trigger. And, I eventually figured out that I could provoke an inflammatory reaction that was very severe just by experiencing some kind of major stress. And then I realized that being stressed while eating was a huge issue, and that's where the
Yes.
whole amygdala thing comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that if I was able to stay calm while enjoying my food, or actually just enjoying my food, not eating at a desk, not eating on the run, not worrying about what food was going to do to me, instead focusing on the positives of the food,
Yeah.
as long as I was able to do that, that made a huge difference.
Yeah, that whole fight or flight nervous system response really messes up your body's ability to digest and break down food. So every time you can be more in that parasympathetic state, you get more enzymes, you get more hydrochloric acid. There's a better chance of you breaking down that food fully and being able to utilize it nutritionally.
Exactly. There was a very interesting study. It was a few years old, but it was about rat brains, and they
Cool.
put rats in front of, and they had to open cages to get to their food, and they measured the release of brain histamine. When the rats had to figure out how to get to their food or experienced any kind of stress, there was a significant release of histamine in the brain. When they
Mm.
were given free access to food and didn't have to work anything out or have any kind of stress, there was no release of histamine in the brain. Now, they were only measuring histamine in the brain in this particular study, but it's not unreasonable to think that, it might be systemic rather than just in the brain.
That's excellent. I love the brain candy. So good. And you really reference a lot of these scientific studies, which is great. It makes it a really good reference not only for patients but also for physicians. I mean, you have this really good blog up here now. I'm looking at it, and it's talking about testing for histamine. And this is really interesting because I typically don't do a lot of testing for histamine unless I have a lot of overt symptoms. Typically, we do a lot of food elimination. And if we pull out certain foods, or we see probiotic intolerance, or we cut out fermented vegetables, or the higher histamine foods, or teas, or DAO blocking foods, and we see improvement, that's kind of how I clinically diagnose. But you talked about a couple of different tests on your site. You talked about testing histamine plasma, looking at DAO, or diamine
Right.
oxidase.
Well, the
Go ahead.
golden,
Hmm.
sorry,
You're good.
the indeed, the golden standard for diagnosis is still considered to be responsiveness
Yeah.
on the elimination diet. And when I run workshops, I tell people that, working with a doctor, obviously, but to keep very detailed food diaries and figure out what's bothering you. And that's kind of your approach, rather than just saying, well, I think I have a histamine issue, I'm just not going to eat any histamine foods because the,
Right.
the food lists tell me this.
Yes.
It's kind of like figure out your own sensitivity. And, I tell people to put them in a spreadsheet, from the foods you're least reactive to most reactive to, and then work towards trying to incorporate foods from the further lists on a very long rotation, and the ones that you're least reactive to more regularly, obviously.
Yeah.
But the testing that exists at the moment for histamine intolerance is only the plasma levels of histamine,
Mm-hmm.
which are unreliable because histamine fluctuates wildly throughout the
Yep.
day and throughout the week. And obviously, if you haven't been eating high histamine foods, the amount of histamine in your plasma is going to be different. And then we have also the diamine oxidase test, which is also fairly unreliable because, when I look at the research about DAO, they're still not entirely sure as to how it's actually working with the histamine, whether it's indicative of high histamine levels or that's just enough DAO for some people. And also it fluctuates depending on what you've eaten and whether you have enough nutrients to manufacture the DAO that particular day. So the two tests that we have that most people may be familiar with, the practitioners that are doing them, are unreliable, which is why the elimination diet is the standard. When we're talking about mast cell activation, which is a related disorder that Dr. Afrin, one of the leading specialists in the field, has he wrote a book recently, and he says that it's believed that maybe 1 in 6 Americans suffers from some kind of mast cell activation. Now, mast cells, as a part of the white blood cell system, as you know, but just for anybody out there listening, mast cells are part of the white blood cell system, and within them are contained histamine, interleukins, heparin, prostaglandins, which are all inflammatory molecules that are needed for healing. But when mast cells become activated, such as provoked, let's say you have an allergy, and so the mast cells break open, a process called degranulation, and they splurge these inflammatory molecules all through the body, and they cause inflammation. Now, if you need that, if it's not provoked by allergy, by stress, or by trigger foods, or by medications that are inappropriate, or whatever it is, then we have too much inflammation, other kinds of inflammation in the body, which is another reason that I don't focus on just a low histamine diet, because we have other types of inflammation in the body. There are foods that correspond to prostaglandins and interleukins also. So we can either drive ourselves insane following, 100 different lists, or do what you advise, which is to work out our individual triggers and go from there. So sorry, for testing for mast cell activation is fairly difficult, because you need to find an immunologist who's willing to test you for it. I've had situations where people have gone to doctors and attempted to pay out of pocket and been told that they would not give them tests, which is frankly something I really just don't understand. At least they could give them a referral to somebody else who would be willing, because I accept that people need to work with a physician. Right. But, refer them to somebody who's open to working with them on it. Just don't tell them mast cell activation is so rare, which it absolutely isn't, that, it's not worth testing it. So for mast cell activation, we have, as you know, basic inflammatory panels, for the molecules that I just mentioned a moment ago. And I'm hoping that more doctors will start getting into these tests, but they are very expensive, and most are not available on insurance, which is why many people don't offer it, even if they're open to it.
And is that the mastocytosis you're referring to, when you have that just accelerated histamine in the body? Is that where you're looking to get diagnosed by your conventional doctor with?
No, actually, mastocytosis is one of them. We have histamine intolerance. We have mast cell activation, which is just the unstable mast cells. Then we have mastocytosis, which is a more serious incarnation of people with mast cell activation wouldn't be happy to hear me say that, because they can be just as severe. But the mastocytosis is linked to a type of leukemia called systemic mastocytosis. Technically a myeloproliferative, I can never pronounce this. Incarnation. But so we have different, they're all linked. They can differ in intensity, severity, and process, but they are linked by the mast cells and by the histamine. Mastocytosis is believed to be rare, as is the systemic, obviously highly rare. But mast cell activation, on the other hand, can be triggered by so many different things. As we said, the parasites, the stress, the exposure to chemicals, which is why it's becoming more and more common, because we just live in a more toxic world generally.
Right. So like mastocytosis is kind of like the pathological expression, versus the histamine or intolerance is kind of more of the functional kind of impression, where you go to a conventional doctor, they may not even recognize it because it's more in that functional realm, where the mastocytosis is more of that in the pathological realm. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I would love to see more functional doctors getting into the mast cell activation, because that seems to be exceedingly common, and I have so many people who have turned out to who have gotten their diagnosis, and it's really quite astonishing.
I agree. And I like how you hit the inflammation piece. You talked about some of the prostaglandins, and we know like prostaglandin E2 is one of the ones that's more the inflammatory. We get that with a lot of refined vegetable oils, excess sugar. You also talked about a lot of the immune system upregulation that happens. Well, we have 5 kinds of immune cells typically. In doctorate school, we learned them by the acronym, at least I did, never let monkeys eat bananas: neutrophils, lymphocytes, eosinophils, monocytes, and basophils. And a lot of them live in the gut, in the malt and the gall, the inside the gut lining. And the big ones are the basophils, and these guys in your blood cell, they're basophils, but when they go into your tissue, they become mast cells. And mast cells they are the ones that erupt the histamine, like you mentioned. And histamine's job is to vasodilate so blood can get in there to help heal. But what's happening is, you mentioned before, Yasmina, is the chronic inflammation that histamine's just coming out all the time, and then you're getting all the symptoms of, well, let's touch upon that. Let's talk about what are the common histamine symptoms that you're seeing with people and yourself.
The common symptoms are, okay, let's see. There's absolutely dozens, but here are the most common ones: migraines, dizziness, brain fog, acid reflux, severe gastric distress, severe bloating of the stomach, inability to pass stools, or the opposite, diarrhea. Some people present with bladder problems. It's linked to interstitial cystitis by Dr. Theoharides at Tufts, who's the director of immunopharmacology there. And he actually makes a supplement for mast cell disorders called Neuroprotec, and there's another one called Cystoprotec, which is specifically for people with bladder issues. I take Neuroprotec myself.
Got it.
Let's see what else there is. Those are the biggies: rashes, urticaria.
Hives. Mm-hmm.
What else? Hives, severe exhaustion, like a chronic fatigue type of exhaustion, and in fact, many people are diagnosed with chronic fatigue, and there is a mast cell link to there, as there is to so many different things. And those are the biggies, I would say. Oh, and obviously intolerances to foods, food allergy-like symptoms, hay fever, that kind of thing. And the thing is, testing for allergies will often come back negative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like
which confuses people.
Yeah, even like an IgG or an IgA test will still, those delayed ones will still kind of come back negative, right?
Exactly. My entire life, my test results have unfailingly come back absolutely normal, which is why I have been pegged as a hypochondriac. And, told that it's psychosomatic, it's all stress. And while they were kind of right, stress is involved.
Yes.
There were very definite issues that people were missing because they were convinced that it was all in my head, because I was in perfect health.
Right. And I find, too, with a lot of the food allergy stuff, typically all the inflammation, like you mentioned earlier, we get this phenomenon known as leaky gut, or in the medical literature, gastrointestinal permeability, where those tight junctions open up and you get all these undigested food particles and even histamine getting into the bloodstream. And so you come back with this test of all these food allergens, you switch your diet around, but guess what? If the gut's still permeable, then you just develop more food allergies. So it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. Exactly.
That's it. I try to explain that to so many people. And yes, there was some research I came across recently that kind of blew my mind, which is that how you cook your food affects allergenicity, first of all, but also can cause mast cell activation, even if you don't actually have a genetic mast cell activation disorder. So it was advanced AGEs, advanced glycation endoproducts, that really lovely crust that you get when you cook something in the oven and you broil it. Creme brulee. Wow. Yes, exactly. Creme brulee, potatoes, anything. It's the process of sugar combining with fat and browning. Yes. And so these AGEs contribute to intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut, through the process of mast cell activation. And there was more research on how quercetin, which is the thing that I take, quercetin helps heal the tight junction permeability of the gut. And also The other one, emulsifiers. Emulsifiers causing mast cell activation of the gut. But something that really, really blew my mind was that, for example, strongly roasting peanuts, according to this one study, typically increases their allergenicity by 30%.
Wow. So
Sorry, no, I have that wrong. Sorry. When compared with raw food antigens,
Yeah.
IgE antibodies were elevated fourfold against processed food antigens in 30% of humans. So 30% of humans experience a fourfold increase in allergenicity when food is cooked, when peanuts are roasted, sorry.
So if you're going to
But
have your
peanuts
nuts,
are already highly allergenic.
got it. So if you're going to have your nuts, you want to soak your nuts, essentially.
Exactly.
All right.
Which, everyone's been telling us for a while, but some of us don't listen.
Yeah, and it makes sense because things like a lot of those foods are very high in phytates or oxalates and a lot of these mineral blockers and enzyme disruptors. So that kind of makes sense that those soaking methods. And I think it's Sally Fallon's book. What is it? Something Traditions. That she talks about a lot of I think it's Nourishing Tradition. That's the book. And she talks about soaking the nuts and things like that and helping to deactivate a lot of those things. So these old type of cooking things kind of make sense when the science kind of looks at the nitty gritty, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned something super topical, which is the oxalates. And for me, oxalic acid turned out to be a huge piece of the puzzle. I focused on histamine for so long, I wasn't seeing the wood for the trees. And,
Yes.
Oxalic acid, found in kale, all the world's healthiest foods, chard, all low histamine foods. But oxalic acid, and I explain it to people like this. So oxalic acid is a plant irritant protection mechanism, as you know.
Yes.
And, along with salicylates, fructose, and other things. So the way I explain it, the inflammation bucket, as I look at it, is we are the giant bucket, obviously. As with the histamine bucket. And within us, we have lots of tiny little buckets. So we have the fructose bucket, the oxalate bucket, the salicylates, all these different little buckets of things, tyramine bucket, all these different things that are found in foods that have the potential to cause inflammation. Well, it just takes one of those little buckets to spill over for the entire bucket to spill over and cause an inflammatory response, the gluten bucket, the whatever bucket. So you might think that, oh, well, I'm on a low histamine diet, but I'm still spilling over. It might be because your salicylate bucket is full, but your histamine bucket is empty. So as I tell people, it's really important to eat a wide variety of foods and to kind of keep track in your head. Initially, I tell people, use a spreadsheet, write out a weekly meal planner. Be aware of the different lists that foods fall into and combine them. I call it the balanced plate. So you'll have a little bit of high salicylate foods, a little bit of low salicylate foods, high histamine, a little bit of low histamine, and just combine it all into one day so that you make sure that you're not making any one of those little buckets overflow.
Really good points. Really good points. So I'm going to put you on the spot. What's your diet like right now? Because one of the things I start off with my patients is typically a paleo template, and then we'll add on different layers to it, whether it's like a low salicylate or oxalate kind of thing with like a specific carbohydrate diet or kind of a GAPS approach or a low FODMAP or even autoimmune approach. I'm just curious to kind of figure out what diet you've kind of created for yourself now.
My diet is in transition at the moment because I'm traveling for the next few months, and that always makes things a little bit difficult. I find myself relying more on proteins when I travel because that's what I can get easily in restaurants, or I can pop into Whole Foods and buy a piece of chicken, some roasted parsnips, or not parsnips, sorry, beets. I'm thinking of England here. Beetroots and that. But I consider myself normally to be, I don't really use labels, but the closest thing it would be is plant-based paleo, but not entirely plant-based. So I would say that it's maybe 70% plant-based with 30% proteins and fats and whatnot. I'm not including fats there, basically. But, for me, a typical day is I would wake up, I will have a green smoothie with very little fruit, or a juice with very little fruit, and maybe some nuts, because I'm not a big eater during the day.
Yep.
For lunch, it'll be a salad with lots of different greens, like all of these different very green greens, like 5 or 6 different kinds, cucumber, carrot, lots of antihistamine and anti-inflammatory herbs like thyme, cilantro, basil, parsley, all chopped up. Make a nice dressing with maybe a teaspoon of mustard, which it will probably be too high histamine for people starting out, but is fine for me. I'll add maybe a little bit of protein to that, usually a piece of fish or something like that. And then dinner, maybe some noodles made from zucchini with a white bean sauce, or I go more protein and, more salad, lots of vegetables, just, whole foods. My diet changes, depending on where I'm traveling to, what I'm currently doing. Lentil pasta. I love lentil pasta. Pasta made out of lentils. It's just amazing. But I find myself always I find myself drawn to the higher protein idea. But the problem is that when I look at the longevity studies, for example, the ones coming out of the University of Southern California under Dr. Walter Longo, all of the life extension studies and disease prevention studies seem to indicate that a lower protein diet is what we want to be focusing on. But of course, that doesn't take into account different age groups and differing protein needs over the years. But that is something that's always in the back of my mind when I go higher protein, and all of the studies showing that the lowered rates of disease in vegans and vegetarians. Obviously, there's problems with all of these studies. There's a problem with every study if you look hard enough.
Right.
But so maybe my I'm skewed towards the ones that lean towards a more plant-based diet, because that's usually my personal preference. I don't like eating too many animals. It's I feel bad for the animals.
I totally get it. But one of the things that I wish those studies really took into account is, number one, typically a lot of people that are more plant-based tend to be more healthy to begin with. They're more conscious of being active or avoiding sugar and avoiding alcohol. So you kind of have that bias too. And then the next one is that we really don't classify what kind of meat. Like, are we talking grass-fed organic meat, or are we talking grain-fed, which means a whole bunch of histamine too, right? And then a whole bunch of antibiotics and pesticides. And I think that really matters too. What's your opinion on the quality of the meat?
Oh, absolutely essential. I mean, I actually had quite an amusing moment. I mean, grass-fed always top preference, budget permitting, obviously.
Yeah.
And I tend to avoid chicken unless I'm traveling because of what they're fed.
Yeah.
Because of, corn being allergenic and the omega-6 and, all of that. And I tend to focus on grass-fed meats and, lamb and things like that. And but it was amusing to me because when I was in France, I lived there for a year recently, and I went into the supermarket, I went to the butcher, and I said, in French, could you tell me which of your meats are grass-fed? And he looked at me and he burst out laughing, and he said, but madame, what else would we feed them? And I thought that was just an amazing answer. Of course they eat grass.
Right, exactly. I know over here in the U.S., it's amazing. It's totally flip, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm terrified when I see some of the things that they're in cattle.
I know. Well, it's getting better because people are putting their dollars, where their mouth is, so to speak, and they're demanding it, which is great. And we're getting more access in a lot of these stores. So that's at least a good shift that's happening.
Absolutely. If only it didn't cost so much and we could include more people on this quest for health, that would be amazing. But, slowly.
Slowly, exactly. Now,
Hopefully one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when I educate my patients on histamines, I kind of break them into like 3 categories. Now, I don't want to get too nerdy. If I go over the top, I'll back up a little bit. But we kind of have like histamines that are just foods that are high in histamine, like the foods, histamine's actually in the food. Then we have like histamine-releasing foods where there may not be a lot of histamine in it, but it stimulates a release. And then we have like the histamine enzyme blocking food, the DAO or the DAO, the diamine oxidase blocking foods. So I just kind of wanted you to touch upon them briefly, and just I have the list in front of me. I don't expect you to remember it, but because it's quite a list. But the foods that are higher in histamines are going to be like your nuts and your vinegars and your fermented foods and your aged meats and citrus. The foods that are going to be histamine releasing are going to be like more of milk, chocolate,
Citrus,
fruits. Bingo.
chocolate.
Yeah, you got it. And then the blocking foods are going to be like your teas and such. But what's your take on that? Just in general.
I mean, it's difficult because unless you've done genetic testing,
Yeah.
for example, I mean, you can figure out if your DAO is impaired or if your HNMT, the histamine methyltransferase, which is the other histamine degrading enzyme, which is only possible to figure out by genetic testing. And also you need to look at the MAO genes and, all of this. Because, for example, you can have a food like I was very upset for a number of years because one of the most popular high histamine food lists had turmeric marked as high histamine. And I just kept saying over and over again, turmeric is not high histamine. It is an antihistamine. It is a mast cell stabilizer. But what it can do is block the DAO. But if you have a person who does not have a DAO problem, then turmeric would be very healing to them. So what I say is, we have, and this is a concept that I struggle to communicate with people, that I've worked with in the past, is that foods can have opposing properties. You can have like the turmeric that blocks something is also antihistamine. As you explained, there's many different types of inflammatory cells in our body, and what's good for one might not be good for the other. So it's all a balancing act, and unless you want to live your entire life in fear and so focused on your health that you forget to live, then my advice to people is just for a couple of months track what works for you. And try and figure out what your tolerances are. Try to see how far you can get without filling your bucket and see what it is that helps you empty the bucket. Here are the general guidelines that seem to work for many people based on the research, bearing in mind that a lot of the research is conducted on animals, not humans, and at quantities at dosages that are much higher than what we would normally get from foods, extracts and whatnot. So, and try and make something for yourself that doesn't completely kill your enjoyment of life and that allows you to have a social life, because the unhappiness that is created by separating yourself from society, by not eating out with your friends, not eating with your family, serving different foods at home, being terrified of the outside world, really, because you are so focused on your health, is counterproductive, because that stress actually causes more histamine release. So it's kind of a never-ending cycle of pain and misery. And so yes, we have all of these different foods with the different properties and with differing properties. And for example, the stem of a plant might have a different property to the fruit, or the leaf or whatever. So, the studies need to be taken with a pinch of salt and all of that. But, I think it's good to be aware of all of this stuff and then kind of take a step back and say, how can I protect my my sanity and have a good quality of life and still have fun?
Got it.
So that's my approach.
Got it. That's great. And then the people that have written to you and that you've worked with, and also yourself, what have been the major histamine offenders? Like, what have really been their kryptonite? Is it more the histamine releasing, the DAO blocking, or more of the high histamine foods, based on your experience?
It's really the fermented foods, number one.
Yeah.
So the fermented foods and the especially the vinegars, the alcohols, and the kombuchas, and most people who come to the histamine diet, the low histamine diet or the antihistamine diet, arrive there via gaps.
Yes.
Because of I see it time and time again, and in fact, that's how I worked out what was wrong with me. In the end, somebody served me Rejuvelat. I don't know if you're familiar with that beauty, but it's a fermented drink made from barley, I think it is.
Okay, yeah,
but she had fermented it for a few weeks, and I think she had combined it with kombucha, and she swore up and down that it would heal me. This was a raw foodist.
Yep.
And I drank it all, and I basically had a seizure. And
Wow.
but it didn't happen immediately, and that's the confusing thing, as you know, with histamine foods,
Right.
because inflammation takes time to build up. So especially if your bucket is already empty,
Right.
you can think that something's not affecting you. And also there's, the power of wishful thinking, such as, well, a Snickers bar doesn't trigger me, but a tomato does.
Right.
Well, now let's really think about that.
Yeah.
Let's be honest with
Right.
ourselves.
Tomatoes obviously better for you than a Snickers bar, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what are the odds really that the Snickers bar isn't doing anything?
Anything.
Are you maybe
Exactly.
just, kind of lying to yourself? But yeah, no, absolutely. So it's mostly the fermented foods.
So are you
Then
telling me I
it's,
can't have bone broth though?
there's a lot of back and forth on that one.
Yep,
I
I see
think it
that.
was the paleo mom, Sarah, who said that.
Yeah, Sarah Valentine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sarah Valentine. And I think it was her who said that, technically, because it's boiling, as long as you keep it at a temperature where bacteria does not start to accumulate, then it shouldn't be an issue.
Right.
Now, that kind of makes sense to me. But at the same time, there's just a lot in bones. There's a lot of different amines that can cause problems in people. Glutamine, for example. And I know this is a struggle for a lot of people because they want to heal the gut, so they want the glutamine, and a lot of people take glutamine supplements, and then they have some sort of major episode. And glutamine is an amine. If you're sensitive to histamine, you're likely to be sensitive to other amines, and glutamine. And so to these people, well, there's another interesting study conducted on animals, which was found that rat mast cells, if you expose them to an antigen for a long period of time at very small doses that increase incrementally, the mast cells eventually stop reacting. So this is what I tell people. A couple of years ago, I couldn't eat anything.
Yep.
I didn't go out and heal my gut. I ate a sensible diet. I didn't do any complicated protocols with bone broth, glutamine, or whatever. I wasn't even taking quercetin at the time, actually. I just started eating a very healthy diet, and I started a process of incremental exposure to things that bothered me. Now, I would not advise anybody at home to do this on their own. I literally couldn't find anybody to work with me, and I took a lot of chances that could have ended very badly because I had very serious reactions in the past. And so in combination with stress relief and meditation, because there's no point in exposing yourself to something if you are so stressed out about it that you're causing a reaction to begin with, because then the brain begins associating that food even more strongly with a negative impact. Because if you experience something negative, your body doesn't want it to happen again. So you start thinking about this thing, and the body might start giving you the feeling of that reaction that you had that bothered you. So I'm not sure I explained that very well, but that goes back to the amygdala, as you know. And the process of desensitization took many forms. One was, I called it, what did I call it? Home-based immunotherapy or something, low-dose immunotherapy. And so, it was, first, I would be in a room for 1 second with flowers, with a big vase of flowers. I'd walk into the room and walk straight out of the room because I had really bad hay fever. Then I would spend a minute in the room, and my best friend walks in, and I have 2 flowers shoved up each nostril. She's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Immunotherapy."
Love it.
But and then I went out, walked through the park. Then I sat and meditated in the park. And it just kind of went from there.
Yeah,
and the same with foods. If something bothered me, I would take the food and I would cook it for just a second in a bit of olive oil, because olive oil boosts the DAO in the gut. So that's a great thing. And I found that with many people, oil-based foods and supplements work better for them when beginning to reintroduce. And I don't know if it's just literally just shielding something from the gut lining where it's inflamed and it's kind of achy, or if it's the DAO boosting of the oils. But in any case, I would just cook something for 1 second in the olive oil. I would take the food out, and then I would cook the rest of my food in that olive oil. And then next time I'd cook it longer, and then I'd leave the food in there.
Interesting. Very cool. Yeah, it's like cooking a frog, right? You put a frog in the water, boiling water, it jumps out. You put it in low, temperature water, and you gradually heat it up and kind of get it desensitized to that change. You can eventually cook that frog.
That is absolutely what I tell people. I'm very amused to hear you say.
Nice. It's a great analogy, but I still don't know anyone that cooks frogs, though.
Well, I lived in France for a year.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Yeah. Yep, that's good. But yeah, that's the analogy. I like it. So just kind of getting all the people that are listening here, summarize all the brain candy that you've dropped here. So we have number one is kind of getting the inflammation down in general, like figure out where those inflammation triggers are, whether it's stress in your life emotionally, meditation, sleep, the gluten sensitivity, forget just being celiac, but the non-celiac gluten sensitivity. We also talked about the desensitization you also touched upon. And I also want to go into a couple other things. I know you have some really good videos online that have been viewed hundreds of thousands of times on supplements and histamine. I know you already touched about quercetin as one of them, and you even mentioned the Dow enzymes. What else do you recommend supplementation-wise?
Mangosteen, well, I'm not a doctor, so I can't recommend anything, but should people wish to discuss with their doctors?
I would just say, let's frame it like this. Things that have worked for you and have worked for patients or people that have written to you and shared them with you.
Right. Okay. So mangosteen supplements, which are made from the skin of the mangosteen, not the actual fruit itself. So drinking the juice is not the same thing. Yeah. Mangosteen supplements work as a mast cell stabilizer, preventing them from releasing inflammation along with histamine into the body, unnecessary inflammation. Might also be beneficial for hair loss that is associated with histamine issues and mast cell activation, which is driven by prostaglandin D2. There is also, hang on, let me look over a little bit. Holy basil, you can buy this, also known as tulsi. Exactly, it's absolutely wonderful. If you have low cortisol, it might not be great for you. It acts as a mast cell stabilizer and antihistamine, highly anti-inflammatory. It's been one of the most healing things I've discovered. You can get it as a tea or as a supplement. Yep. There is also, it's important to have, to make sure that you are not lacking in nutrients. I'm finding more and more people, and I've been saying this for years, but people restrict themselves so much that they lack vital nutrients that will help fight the inflammation. So on the one hand, you're restricting foods because the symptoms go away, but that's a short-term achievement because long-term, as you deplete your nutrients, you become incapable of fighting inflammation in the future. Probiotics are a really difficult one. Because on the one hand, obviously, it's a problem with the fermentation, and some people, if they're lactose-based, but Seeking Health make a histamine-safe probiotic, which is basically there are strains that raise histamine and trigger inflammation, but this, and here's again where it gets confusing, but in many cases, this might not be a bad thing in the long term because they have other positive effects on other aspects of inflammation. But for our particular needs, they may not be appropriate because in the short term, they trigger this histamine release. So the Seeking Health Probiota Bifidio is what it's called, has the histamine neutral and histamine lowering strains in it. Otherwise, for people who are unable to tolerate probiotics, prebiotic foods are a good option. Things like chicory, dandelion, those high fiber plantains, things like that. And magnesium, a lot of people find beneficial simply because it calms the nerves, and it's necessary for proper manufacture of the DAO enzyme. We have DAO pills, diamine oxidase pills, made from pork extract. Yep. And those, mixed reports on that. They really work for some people. They don't work for other people. They initially worked for me, then did not. And then I just didn't like the fillers in them. But, people were talking about a plant-based one. Different companies issued patents for them. I also troll the patents to see what's new and what's coming out. But
Nice.
something interesting that I'm waiting to see more on, but I haven't heard anything about it for a while, was a handheld device that could measure histamine content of foods for the consumer. And
Oh, wow.
because of concern to me, although I am not concerned when I eat foods anymore, and although I am careful about what I eat, I will eat what I want. I will have a baguette, a nice piece of crusty French bread when I'm in France. I will have, well, no, ice cream. I just don't like dairy. That's the thing. But I will eat what I want within reason, because I just don't deal with any of this on a regular basis anymore. But oh no, and I forgot where I was going with this. That's terrible.
So you were saying that you were able to do, you were eating the bread and such because you were able to tolerate it more frequently?
Yes, and I was making a point with that. I'm sorry, and I don't know where I was going. Never mind.
It's okay.
But
It'll come back to you. It'll come back.
it'll come back. But so
We were still talking about the supplements. We were hitting. You hit the mangosteen. We talked about the diamine oxidase. Is there any other supplements you want to add to that list?
some people, those are the primary ones that work for most people. Vitamin C.
Oh yes, yes.
Vitamin C
perfect.
is Vitamin C is a mast cell stabilizer and also an antihistamine. It's actually really, really, really powerful, and it is even prescribed by the world's leading mast cell activation experts in the field. And the one caveat is to make sure it's not
Yes.
corn-based. And for obvious reasons, but it gets worse than that. It's not just corn, but it's fermented corn, which is not great. And something to watch out for is citric acid, just so people know. Often derived from mold, and that's something we obviously need to avoid. People make the assumption that it's derived from lemons, but no.
Right. And also, you mentioned before that you like a lot of vitamin C that comes from palm. Is that true?
Yeah, that's the one I've been using, simply because it came packaged with quercetin, but that one is now no longer being manufactured.
Was that the
which
one
is
by?
very
Is that
upsetting.
the one by Twin
My
Balance?
Twin Lab,
Twin Labs,
exactly.
yes.
Yeah, and it's just out of stock, and people write to me every day about it, but sadly it's out of stock. My usual preference is for a whole food supplement, so something like camu camu,
Yes.
but a lot of people are reactive because it's a berry, and some of the berries are problematic for us. Acerola cherry vitamin C,
Yep.
some people do well with, and I generally get a lot of vitamin C from my diet already, but if you're traveling, if you eat something that didn't agree with you, vitamin C can sometimes help.
Got it. And you mentioned, I think, in your story, I'm not sure if you said it today or if I saw it in one of your videos or blog posts, you mentioned you lost over a third of your hair on your head. Is that true?
Oh, that was awful. That was so awful.
It does sound terrible. I see lots of patients that have that, though. And I'm just curious, just on a personal note, do you see a connection between hypothyroid? Because hair loss is a common hypothyroid symptom. Do you see the connection with thyroid issues and histamine issues, too?
For a lot of people, that is the case.
Yeah.
And I would encourage people to make sure they have enough iodine in their diet or iodine-containing foods, which is a huge problem nowadays. But in my case, my thyroid was, although I was at one point told I might be hypothyroid, I mean, I was still well within range, and I was prescribed the thyroxine, which made me feel awful
Synthroid,
for a
right.
month. Yeah, exactly. And I came off it. For most people, not for most people, for people dealing with mast cell activation or histamine issues, it is very likely that it is either a thyroid issue because we're already dealing with an immune system breakdown,
Right.
or just general body breakdown. But also, it's important to bear in mind that one of the most common side effects of inflammation is hair loss. And you can pin it down to interleukins and prostaglandins. And if there is an excess of either of those, then it's likely that they are contributing to hair loss. So it's something that should be looked at also. I don't feel that people who are within the normal range for their thyroid, technically what's considered considered technically the normal range,
Right.
that the first approach should be to prescribe thyroid, the armor or whatever,
Synthroid,
to
right.
people just on the basis of hair loss. I think that further testing for inflammatory molecules should be done, and that's, as I said, the interleukins and the and this is something for people out there who do decide to pursue testing of their mast cells, for example. It's important to have a physician who will run a full panel rather than just one or two.
Yes.
And as you know, there's many different tests. There's the 24-hour N-methylhistamine test, which is a urine test, which is a test for a metabolite of histamine, which is much more accurate than the histamine plasma test. But there are others, and most doctors will only do one. But the thing is, you can test negative for excess histamine in your urine, but if you have a high prostaglandin level or interleukins, heparin, or whatever, that can intensify the effects of histamine in the body by up to, according to one medical study, up to 1,000 times.
Okay. So that's big, because prostaglandins. Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. So exactly. So if one of your levels is off, or two of your levels are slightly off, this all compounds and can indicate that you have massive inflammation, because they build on each other and they cause the bucket spillover. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was perfect, because the prostaglandin E2, the one you mentioned, and the eicosanoid 2, it goes high in inflammation. So kind of everything I think you're really driving the point home on is it all comes back to inflammation. The more inflamed you are, the more that histamine's going to have a more virulent effect on your body. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Great.
It's
awesome.
So nice to be interviewed by a doctor.
Well, thanks. You've really brought some awesome knowledge bombs today. I mean, seriously, you got all the research going. You got a lot of experience with different people that are writing to you. I mean, I have a lot of my patients that are very familiar with your work, and I use a lot of your blogs as references clinically. So I appreciate all the great work that you're doing, too, and getting the word out there.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure being interviewed by somebody who knows the subject so well and has helped so many people. You asked all wonderful questions, and I'm really excited to get the information out there.
Thank you so much. Her name is Yasmina Ykelenstam. You can find her at thelowhistaminechef.com. Subscribe to the Facebook there, and also she's got some really good cookbooks. As she mentioned, they are a 25-page ebook, all on histamine on her site. So go over there, check it out. Lots of good recipes. Last question. Yasmina, you're stuck on a desert island. You only can bring one supplement. What do you bring?
That would be quercetin. That would be the Dr. Theorita's Neuroprotec, which is quercetin and luteolin.
Love it. All right. Everyone go out there and get that. Well, thank you so much, Yasmina. We will post this up, and feel free and share it with your peeps at your site, too, to help get this information out there. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to BeyondWellnessRadio.com and click the questions button. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, click below to review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to BeyondWellnessRadio.com.